Loki, the Trickster, the Rook. If you'll remember from the intro to the Archetypes and the Yggdrasil video, Loki is the Rook, but he's also that subversive archetype, that chaos. He walks the line between the two, and that's common of trickster deities in general. They walk between the shadow and the light, sometimes starting off in the light and then ending up in the shadow, like in Loki's case. If you'll remember from my Joker review, I mentioned how that was a very negative way to integrate the shadow. And you see that in Loki, in Lokasina, and the events after the party where Loki calls everyone out on their crap. He starts off as a fairly mischievous character and then ends up engaging in those shadow aspects because he's not quite like everyone else. He very much is rejected by the status quo in many ways just for being who he is. And a lot of Lokians, Lokian is what people that follow Loki call themselves, they gravitate toward Loki as an archetype, as a patron deity, because they see themselves in that. They are, a lot of the times, the outcasts, the wallflower. And you saw that in Arthur Fleck in the Joker movie. He's trying to live life, trying to do the right thing, taking care of his mother, doing all that stuff. And toward the end of the movie, he becomes his shadow because he had been pushing that down for so long. And a lot of people that consider themselves Lokian follow in that same vein. You'll find that in a lot of people that are Rokotru, Thursatru, which if you remember from my types of Norse paganism video, those are the more subversive paths. And people that try to align themselves with those shadow personas, what is shadow to society, not necessarily the individual. Yeah, they're outcasts. They're that exact same person. And of course, there are varying degrees. Like, I've felt a strong connection to Fenrir, and a lot of that has to do with not being understood for my various aspects, but I'll go over that whenever I talk about Fenrir. Another interesting detail about Loki that defies the status quo of the Aesir is he doesn't take his father's name as his surname. If you're unaware, in the Norse as well as modern Icelandic practice, you take your father's last name and then add son or daughter, obviously relative to your own gender. With Loki, it's actually his mother's name. His father is Thorbalti, which means cruel striker. It's one of the translations anyway. And his mother, Laufey, which Marvel gets wrong when they... not that they get a whole lot right, to be honest, but they have Laufey be a dude in the... Yeah, so that's the whole thing. And he is not the brother or stepbrother to Thor. He is actually a blood brother of Odin. This is probably some kind of pact that they had. In Lokasena, actually, Loki is able to enter the hall despite them not being big fans of his at the time. I believe because of the death of Balder, if I remember correctly. The reason that Loki was allowed in was because of that pact with Odin, and that Odin oathed that he would never have a drink while Loki was without one. Which is also an interesting correlation, because Odin also has a lot of trickster qualities. He's a Synex, obviously, he's that old wise man. So Odin is very much a trickster as well. And I talked about that in a little bit in my intro to the archetypes, how nobody's truly like one. Loki's very much trickster. I can't think of too much where he's anything other than the Rook. But with Odin, he's definitely, Synex sometimes, king sometimes. So bishop, king. But he also falls along the lines of the trickster because he does use treachery and subterfuge to teach as well as to create events, like setting forth the Volsung saga, for example. Another interesting correlation with Loki, and this will kind of come around to the various tricksters of other pantheons. Ingirboda, who is his baby mama for the mother of Fenrir the wolf, Jormungand, the Midgard serpent, and Hel, the goddess of the underworld. She has a lot of correlations with Mother of Monsters, and we'll kind of get that'll kind of come around, and you'll notice that there's a probable Proto-Indo-European origin to a lot of these myths. Again, because archetypes come up over and over again in human storytelling because they're part of our psyche, and they come out as we filter the world through our psyche, right? You can't look at the world without using your mind, which is why I get really confused when I talk to people and they're like, no, man, you gotta look at like mythicism and mythology. And talked to one guy about that once, and he was like, no, you gotta look at these mythologists. And I'm like, but the world is seen through human psychology. But that's a soapbox for another day. And yeah, Ingirboda is very much a subversive female. She has a lot of qualities that go against the grain of what a woman is supposed to be. And you'll see as we keep going that figure, a mother that defies the status quo, keeps coming up and keeps being the consort of the trickster. Another interesting correlation between Loki and other mythologies. Prometheus, he was famous for acquiring fire. Fire is another thing that keeps coming up in the trickster deities, as well as the color red. Prometheus is bound, I think it's to a stone of some sort. I want to say it's a giant hand, but I'm sure I'll throw it up on the screen as I'm editing this. Prometheus is punished by being bound. His liver is eaten daily by some giant bird. And Loki is bound to a stone with his son's entrails, of all things. And he is tortured with a snake above his head, which his wife, holds the venom in a bowl. And every time she tosses the venom, because the bowl gets full, Loki shudders and creates earthquakes. Earthquakes are another thing associated with these trickster deities. A lot of negative things associated with them. Snakes also keep coming up, as we'll see as we keep going. There are also no known cults of Loki in the arch-heathen times. Some trickster deities do have followings. I don't know if Set in the Egyptian had any followings, but his name was used for some of the Egyptian names. And early on which we'll go over, Set was also seen as a more benevolent figure and defied Apophis, which is another snake. So you see that keeps coming up in the mythology. So it's entirely plausible that Lokians are a modern creation. I theorize that similar to Floki in Vikings, there were some people that associated themselves with Loki. Probably weren't people that lived in society, probably on the outskirts, probably the people that were rejected by society, so to speak. But that's my personal theory, and there's no history to corroborate that. One of the reasons that we know that Loki definitely wasn't any kind of mainstream as far as worth giving worship, there's no place names that are named after Loki. There is one stone that we believe might have been Loki, and one of the things that give that away is he has scars around his lips. That's one of the physical signifiers of Loki, because he made a bet with these dwarves, and it's actually how Thor's hammer came to be, and that his dwarves that he knew could make better stuff than Brock and Eitri, I believe is his name, who made Thor's hammer, as well as Gulinbursti, Freysbor, and Skidblathnir, and Gungnir, Odin's spear. So tricksters. Again, these archetypes keep coming up in human psychology and human stories, as well as human spirituality, right? So we experience the world through our psyche. Coyote. Coyote is a big one. Now, coyotes are native to North America, so we see them in Native American mythology. And some tribes very much see Coyote as bearer of evil, jealous, impulsive. He brings about winter, death. These are things that tricksters commonly get associated with. Where other tribes see him as a teacher of wisdom. He can share a priceless wisdom. He's also part of some creation myths. I can't remember the tribe. There's one where Raven and Coyote create the world, and Coyote is jealous. I can't remember exactly, but Coyote does something that defies death. If I can find the video, I'll link it in the description and throw it up on here. It was pretty interesting though. There's also a good Crash Course video, so I'll put a link in the description, as well as an extra credits video on the, I think he calls them Nalakam tribe. And there's some associations with Coyote and getting the fire for men, like Prometheus, and in that extra credit videos he talks about it. It's kind of an interesting myth. Set in the Egyptian, as I mentioned a little bit ago. He's also an archetype of chaos. He's associated with deserts and storms, desert storms, but not desert storm. His name has been translated as instigator of confusion or destroyer. And he's one of the original gods that were created by, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly, but Nut, I believe. N-U-T, might be Nut, hope not. Created by Nut. And Geb, the earth, their earth deity is male, which is kind of interesting. And in the early dynastic period, which is roughly 3150 to 2613 BCE, Set was seen as a more friendly deity. This is when he was commonly used for love invocations, and it was believed that he assisted Ra in fighting Apophis. Apophis is this enormous snake, and again, snakes, trickster deities kind of go hand in hand, as well as thunder deities, which we'll get in when I talk about Thor. Apophis can almost be seen as kind of a Jormungand Fenrir, sort of Hathi and Skoll kind of thing, whereas he is the darkness. He's associated with eclipses. There's a snake deity in the Vedic who's more associated with devouring the moon, and he has some similar qualities. He's also like a severed head, a body. There's a whole thing. Thunder Wizard actually has a few videos on him. I'll throw a few of those in the description. But in that early dynastic period, Set helped Ra. He was a very positive figure. And I mean, you'll see with Loki, if you read the lore, that early on he's not very malevolent. He's more jovial, including when Skadi wanted her revenge for the death of her father. He made her laugh. I believe it's a UPG thing, but it's believed that, at least by some, obviously UPG is not believed by everybody, that Loki maybe even slept with Skadi, and Skadi was actually the one that put the snake above his head when they bound him. So then when you get into the New Kingdom in Egypt, roughly 1570 to 1069 BCE, yes, I'm reading notes, he was considered the first murderer. He killed Osiris. There's a famous myth of him murdering Osiris and scattering all the pieces, and then Isis, the goddess, not the terrorist group. I'm really irritated that a freaking terrorist group totally ruined the name of a goddess, by the way. That's just, I don't know, like, fuck you, Isis. Anyway, the organization, not the goddess. So the goddess Isis, she had to resurrect Osiris, and now he's the god of the underworld and all that. So that's the big myth about Osiris, the big lore, Egyptian lore. And then the Greeks associated Set with Typhon. Typhon is the father of monsters. There's an interesting bit. He laid down by the fire and made sweet, sweet love to Echidna. I don't know if they made sweet love, but
tonight is right for love.
I'd like to think so, though. And Echidna was the mother of monsters. This is the Angerboda type, right? She has some association with Lamia, who is associated with Lilith. If you're not familiar with Lilith, Lilith is supposedly Adam's first wife who wouldn't lay under him. There are earlier accounts of the Lilitu, which are associated with Inanna, the love goddess, and there's a whole thing there. I'll actually put a pretty sweet video. I think they're called the Milwaukee Atheists. They did a video on it. And he goes over the history of Lilith if you're really interested in that. Pretty in-depth video. I actually learned quite a bit. Yeah, so you see that trickster figure, this defiant god of chaos and the mother of monsters, and they merge together, and a lot of these monsters that the Greek heroes fought were actually their children, or at least attributed to be so. Even though Zeus is closer etymologically to Tyr and Tiwaz, this sky figure, sky deity. He's also a deity of thunder, and him and Typhon fought. Typhon's a Titan, and if you're unaware of the Greek mythology, the Greek gods and the Titans fought similar to how the Aesir fought the Jotnar in Norse myth. And then Hermes and Pan, who are also trickster deities, interestingly enough, helped Zeus to fight Typhon. And I don't know the details of that story too much, but again, I'll throw a couple of links down there. It's also good to click all those links because it helps the algorithm know what to show you if you're really interested in this kind of stuff. So, food for thought. And then, of course, I mention this guy every time I talk about Thor. Perun. Perun is Slavic Thor, essentially. There's more to him than that, but he is thunder deity, leader of their pantheon, which some attribute Thor to leading the Norse pantheon either at certain points or depending on what area you're in. And Perun and Veles have a conflict, and Veles is also a trickster archetype. He's more associated with shadow than trickster, though, but he's still very subversive in his nature. And I found a fairly new channel, actually, that doesn't have too many subscribers, and I'll put their video below as well, because he goes over not only their relationship, but he's got a second part of a video that goes over why Perun and Veles fight, and a lot of it has to do with Veles being very jealous of Perun and his wife specifically, and kind of causes a chain reaction. The Veles he's a horned deity, and he is very associated with forests and dark things, wolves, bears, a lot of things that we might actually attribute with Odin to a certain extent, and I'll go over that whenever I go over Odin. I'm always confused when people don't think Odin is a trickster archetype. It's I believe more so their want for him not to be. So in summary, Loki is very much subversion. He subverts expectations. He's associated with forbidden magic and things you're not supposed to do. A lot of villains have this trickster aspect about them. Green Goblin comes to mind. The Joker is another one. The game Smite has actually made a Joker skin called Jokey, which is pretty funny. A lot of these tricksters become corrupt eventually through jealousy or...
A tank?
A tank?
A tank.
Yeah. They're the reason for many adventures. I've heard it mentioned that Loki is the reason the universe moves. That without Loki, the universe would not be able to move. They're often associated with fire. Fire is a very chaotic element.
Hey,
that makes sense.
where'd it go?
Where'd what go? Fire is a very destructive element. It's very chaotic. That makes sense. And there's a conflict with the thunder deity. The thunder deity, who, by the way, is almost always redheaded or copper-toned or red-skinned. Hashtag keep Thor ginger. Yeah. Like that. The trickster can show us hard truths. Like in Lokasena, he calls all the gods out on their crap. He makes us question our shadow. The trickster archetype is very much a bridge between us and the shadow. Yeah, the trickster is a bridge between us and the shadow, making us face that which we fear. And humor is a great way to do that. I believe it's the Buddhists that actually have a practice of laughing at demons in order to defy their power and then make us question the status quo. And then you see a lot of organizations that are afraid of the shadow, like the Folkish are a big one because they have such a heavy Christian influence. And these more dualistic philosophies that put the shadow as bad and negative, which it's not entirely, they end up repressing their shadow because thanks, buddy. Because they're so afraid of it, they want to push that down. So a lot of people will repress these instincts, these like natural things that they have in them, like let's say a hyper-masculine man, for example, to use kind of a light way to define shadow and what that is, might repress their femininity, and they don't really give into that side, and then it ends up creating, I don't know, a weird perversion of some sort. Whereas if you work with your shadow and you work with your archetype, and as I've said before in previous videos, this is why you see so many people. So if you repress that shadow, it's going to come up in some negative way. And this is why you see these like super pious Christian types, becoming weird perverts of some sort. And it ranges from stuff that's illegal, so we hear about it, or stuff that isn't illegal, so the church just brushes it under the rug. And the Catholics aren't the only ones that do it. It's basically every denomination, if not every denomination. And that's what happens when you don't accept your shadow and don't try to work through it rather than just burying it down. And that's that negative shadow integration that will end up happening. Because if you repress those urges, the shadow, no matter what those urges are, you end up creating more of a monster. And I think this is what we see with the Jotunheim in the Yggdrasil, which I went over in that video. As you see that these horrific, deformed monsters. But of course we can't accept all of the shadow. You can't just run around willy-nilly. Obviously there's certain implications with, if you did whatever the hell you wanted, people would get hurt, and of course your life would go to crap, and that's negative shadow integration. And it seems very much like the thunder archetype, that knight figure in its various incarnations, keeps the trickster in check. So it seems like the thunder archetype, that knight figure, that Thor, that Perun, that Indra, keeps the trickster at bay, and they both have like snakes associated with them. Red hair is often a #KeepLordGinger is very much part of that balance. We'll go over more of how that helps with shadow work specifically, and how that works toward breaking down those mental barriers and ultimately making you a better person, because you're not only integrating your shadow, but you're doing it in a very healthy way, which is very important to mental health, in my opinion. Obviously, I'm not a mental health clinician or anything, but I see people with that repressed shadow constantly, including when I was doing security in mental health. A lot of them have hyper-religiosity, specifically pertaining to Christianity, and that comes with a very black and white thinking and a repression of that shadow. When a lot of those people have had a lot of negative things happen to them, and those negative things get pushed into the shadow rather than being confronted. That's kind of what the Thunder God does, is he confronts himself. So he confronts your Loki, your trickster. I mean, that's about it. We'll go over in a future video also how one finds their patron deity, as well as what that means. And because we're never solidly aligned with one deity. Like, I'm an Odinsman, but I consider Fenrir to be a big part of my shadow. And then, I wear a Thor's hammer. Thor is also very important. And then so is Loki. And then, like I mentioned in my Yggdrasil video, these different parts are parts of us. It's just that we associate with one because of certain needs that are fulfilled. And again, we'll go over that whenever I do an actual video on patron deities. Kind of like I've mentioned about Lokians with this video, but we tend to need that archetype for some reason. And it's really up to us to figure out why. Like, subscribe, comment, do the thing. My links are in the description below if you feel like following me on whatever random social media. I've been using the Twitters more. It seems like a lot of people just use Twitter to debate crap. I don't know, whatever. The gods are in us all. Skull!